Welcome, Erik.
On, or do I need to turn it up? Sounds like it's on. Thank you for coming. I was a little worried when Ken was talking about those green sheets because I thought everybody would just leave when they didn't have the green sheets. So I didn't see anybody stand up. I appreciate you, you being here. I also appreciate the question about pink. Pink is Pendo's favorite color, so it feels like I was right back in the office.
I thought you did that for Lori. It's her favorite color.
My favorite color too.
So yeah, that's exactly why we picked it, actually. I messed it all up. So what I want to talk about a little bit is market disruptions and innovation. I don't know if everybody knows what the top 5 companies in the United States are by market cap, and 4 of the top 5 in the world are. But they're Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and Facebook. What do they all have in common? Well, they're all tech companies. Right? We probably all use their products. They're also all pretty much less than 40 years old. Something happened in the mid-'70s that caused all this innovation and all of this disruption and all these huge market opportunities for companies. If you're curious what the number 4 largest company in the world is, it's Tencent, a Chinese company that is an internet technology company. So internet, technology, computers, software, it's probably why everybody here went into computer science. Right? It's obviously a pretty good career choice. But I got interested in kind of where all this market value came from. And when Ken asked me to come speak here, I figured I would talk about what I was interested in, because at least I'd enjoy the talk. I don't know if you will or not. But I did graduate from NC State a little over 20 years ago. My first job was at Red Hat. I'm putting this up there just so you kind of know why I'm speaking of this. And it was during the internet bubble. And we raised a bunch of money. We went public. I was so interested in where that money came from, frankly, that I went back and got a master's degree in economics. And then I went right back into tech because it's what I really liked. Founded RPath, raised a bunch of money. Then I co-founded Pendo, and we're during our current market expansion. Is it a bubble? I don't know. I know that there's a whole bunch of money going into tech companies again. Red Hat, when it went public, the shares tripled on the first day. That was in 1999. I was very lucky to be there for that. And I was really lucky to be there for this when Pendo just raised another $50 million a couple weeks ago. That's our mascot, by the way, the pink dinosaur. We rolled it all right down Fayetteville Street, down Fayetteville Street and Hillsborough Street. So there's a video online of it going around the city when we were moving offices recently. So I didn't say all this just to say, how cool my job is, but it did make me really interested in why does this happen? How can it happen again? And why do these valuations start to make sense? There was a point where Red Hat, when we IPO'd, was worth more than General Motors. We had $12 million of revenue. So what was that all about? Right? That is a crazy multiple. It may be worth more than General Motors now, I'm really not sure, but now they have $3 billion in revenue, so it makes a little more sense. But I remember looking at the stock ticker and looking at things going, wow, like we're 120 people in Research Triangle Park, and all of these people are feeding money into it. And they saw something that I didn't, quite frankly. So how do you create market value? How do you define market value? If you want to start a company or you want to work for a small company, what is it you should be looking at to know if the company has legs? The most important factor is what's called total available market. It's the sum of everybody you might sell a product to. Not that they're going to choose you, not that you don't have competitors, not that they're exactly in your market, but everybody you might sell a product to. Fidelity probably defines their market as everybody in the US with a bank account, for instance. Toyota, everyone in the world who needs a car and probably makes enough money to afford a small car. But in Capital Ford up in North Raleigh, their TAM is smaller. Right? It's really everybody in Raleigh who needs a car because they're not going to go sell to Charlotte. There's actually national laws against them selling in Virginia. Right? It's a very split up market. Diamonds Direct is everybody who's getting married. They want you to go there to get your diamond, as opposed to Bailey's Jewelers, which is a high-end jewelry store in Cameron Village, where they're looking for people at a certain percentage of income. Right? So they're all different markets. So companies serve a certain total available market, or TAM. When you go and talk to a venture capitalist, or if you go talk to a private equity investor, one of the first things they're going to ask about is your TAM. What's your TAM look like? How big is it? How did you measure it? And the reason is it starts to define what you can sell. That's the number they want to hear if you're talking to a top-tier VC. So you need to have a story about how are you going to reach $1 billion market. Now, why do they want $1 billion? Because you might only go achieve 5% of it. But if you achieve 5% of it, you're doing $50 million a year in revenue. And you might not have to reach it on day one with your first product, but you need a story. I'm going to start here, I'm going to grow here, I'm going to get this, and that is what I visualize my total available market as. Really important measure. Lots of things limit a TAM. The number of people who are experiencing the problem that you have. So the problem that you're addressing is microphones for speakers, the echo that I can hear a little bit. You know, there's a certain size market, but only so many people are going to get that problem. The price point you're selling at, how many people can afford to buy my product? So if I sell at $10, huge TAM, I might lose money. If you sell at $100,000, you have many fewer buyers, but when you multiply the two together, you might even have a larger TAM. Right? There's a lot of large companies like Caterpillar, where Caterpillar is selling to $50,000 bulldozers, whatever they cost. There's only so many buyers of that, but they're selling at a very high price point. How hard is your product to use? You know, Apple basically built a huge market of people who didn't want to deal with the complexity of Microsoft products. And that's why they became successful, one of the big reasons. And what does your product need? What is the market you're selling to? Do you need a computer at all? Do you need an iPhone X, or can you make it do with an iPhone 4? Do you need broadband? How much? So all of these things go into defining your total available market. The flip side of that is, how can you increase your total available market? Well, you can go overseas. You can go to a bigger market. So I think General Motors sold 70% more cars in China than in the United States last year. I bet their market dollars were bigger in the United States. But that's the way they're trying to double or even triple their total available market. Netflix, totally defined by US broadband penetration. Right? If you go back, I don't know how many people here remember, Netflix used to mail you discs. They still might do that. I don't know. I bet nobody here has gotten a disc in the mail from Netflix ever. But as they watch broadband grow, watch broadband come, they said that is a big total available market. And you could track Netflix's growth by the broadband penetration in the United States. Right? So that was how they defined their total available market. Consumers with probably a 4 megabit internet connection. Microsoft defined their total available market when they were founded as everybody with a desk. They wanted to put a computer on every desk. That was their official, we have this thing that we start companies, you call it a big, hairy, audacious goal, or a BHAG. What is your BHAG? My BHAG at Pendo, we want to have, 10 billion people every month have some interaction with Pendo. How many people are there in the world? I think 6, 7? Well, we have a lot of customers so people can use our product through different routes. So that's our goal. Right now, we're at 100 million. So as far as I'm concerned, we're 1% of the way through Pendo. And we've been doing it for 5 years, so I'm not sure how that's going to work out for me. I'm probably not going to make it to 500. But all of these things help you define where you're going. Now let's talk about the cost side. It costs a lot of money to start a business. I just raised $50 million, and we've raised a ton of money at all the companies I've been involved in. Where does that money go? Well, it goes into infrastructure. You got to buy these things, got to buy chairs, got to buy computers, desks. Right? So all that money from going to venture funds, they want you to spend the money. They want you to invest it to grow. But people, I hired 2 or 3 graduates from this program last June. If you want a job, come talk to me. We will be hiring more next year, right? And that's just in my department. We have grown from 100 to 200 people in about 10 months. So all of those people, they like getting paid, it turns out. They need health care because you don't want them coughing and sick on the street. So all of that costs a lot of money, and training. You have to teach them to do their job. When you guys graduate, I expect a new graduate from NC State, when they join my team, to add value in 90 to 180 days. Before that, you're just a cost. And I don't mean that personally. You have to learn about my technology, my tooling, my product, my customers, my process. Right? So if I get value out of somebody in the 90 to 180 days, that's a win. I feel really good about that. But that means I'm paying all these costs for people, right? Because I'm still paying them. You have to acquire customers. How are you going to reach your customers, and how are you going to tell them that you exist? Marketing, sales, support, all of those things, all your customer costs, all the cost to provide your product. When you put all that together, what is the value of a company? It's your market divided by your cost. Now, this is not your NASDAQ value. Your NASDAQ value is how much money you make, and you multiply it by your earnings, and you multiply it by this factor, and blah, blah, blah. But when you are starting a new company, this is the ratio that's going to define how big you can get. So it's related to your market cap if you're successful. So what happened to make all the Facebooks happen? Well, there was a 40-year technology boom. Technical achievements that have come from universities like NC State, MIT, Stanford, have driven down costs. So everything's gotten cheaper. So what's that do to your value? Drives it up. Right? Well, new products have at the same time driven up the total available market that a company can go after. The markets have gotten bigger. So if you think about that ratio, if I drive up my market size and I drive down my cost, the value of an individual company can reach is very, very high. So that's a short answer. Now let's talk about some kind of how that happened historically. This is where it all got started, the personal computer market. I feel like I should ask people who remember this, how many people remember this, but I won't. That's a personal question, I understand. For me, it got started right here. If you've never seen one of these before, I'm a little annoyed. This is the original IBM PC. This came out in 1981. Believe it or not,
Case across the hall, people can look at it on the way out.
Is there a real one here?
Yeah.
This was launched into a crowded market of companies you've probably never heard of. There were probably 15 companies out there building these things, and their market was really small. They only sold to people who are microcomputer enthusiasts. If you didn't really, really care, you didn't have a computer. So IBM comes out. At the time, IBM defined computer. If you thought of the word computer, you thought IBM. Just like, right now if you think search engine, you think Google. Like, they're almost the same word, right? We kind of know they're different, but whoever uses Bing. So, did I mention I built my career at Red Hat and not Microsoft? Not sure. So this thing comes out. The price performance was literally 10 times a mini computer. So it was this big. You didn't have to get the power company to go install power for you. You didn't have to install an air conditioner, and it was $2,500. That's about $4,500 in today's money. So it's half the price of a car, maybe less, maybe a third. So people could go buy these. They could buy them for work. They could buy them for their kids. They could buy them for home. So it was a huge hit. It totally blew past everybody's expectations. It dominated the market, selling 750,000 of these things 2 years later. Now, if you want to kind of play a little game with yourself, go look up at some point how many phones Apple sold last quarter, and you'll kind of see how the market for technology has changed. But this really changed the world, right? All of a sudden, there were tens of thousands of microcomputers out there, tens of thousands of mini computers out there. All of a sudden, the PC market's being measured in the millions. But IBM didn't define the TAM for the microcomputer because they did one open system. Anybody could go download the book about how a PC works. I actually have my copy from when I was like that big that my dad got. I still have it sitting on my bookshelf. And I keep it because it reminds me how I got into this and how I got excited. It had circuit diagrams in it. Like, can you imagine going and buying an iPhone and having a circuit diagram in it? That'd be pretty weird, right? But they defined how everything worked, that anybody could go buy it. So all of these companies, some of which you've probably heard of, only some of which I had heard of before I put this talk together, they started building IBM PCs and IBM PC compatibles. By 1992, IBM was 10% of this market. So they were the single biggest player. That's how many there were. But so this market was huge, right? It became into tens of millions. What did this do to the software market? Because now people needed software. Remember, before this point, software sold for what? It sold for $50,000 machines made by Digital Equipment Corporation or IBM. If you wanted to be a software developer, you were writing for one of those two things. Well, the total available market's massive. Tens of millions of these things out there. Your cost to enter is much, much lower. You don't have to buy one mini computer. You can buy a PC. You can probably go to a university and use a PC or a library. They fit on your desk. They don't need power. They don't need air conditioning. Your software development stack was really cheap. So everything's better. So we got a whole bunch of companies. companies start popping up out of the woodwork. Some of these companies, maybe you've heard of, Intuit, PCs for CPAs, PCs for accounting. Before that, you used a HP calculator. Adobe, very much PCs for designers. Right? They started making it so you could do your own newsletters, you could do your own graphics work, things you could never do before you had a PC. Autodesk was PCs for architects. Architects didn't have to draw pictures anymore. So some of these are still around. Borland was all developer tools. It was developed tools for people like you and me. It's where I learned to program. So that as you got onto a PC, you could become a developer. You could buy this for $99 or $149. So you got tons of software, and every one of these companies is worth a lot of money. Well, it turns out that there was a winner. That was their old logo. I was happy to find it. They did PCs for the office. Right? And that's just PC for every desktop, right? So they won, and they really won. They won big. Why did they win? Because they had this program called DOS. DOS was the operating system. It's what came before Windows. You were not a PC unless you had DOS. And if you had DOS, you were a PC. So all of those computers that the core data and the control data systems and companies like Leading Edge and Tandy were building, everybody was selling MS-DOS with it. So what was Microsoft's TAM? It wasn't a segment of the market, it was the whole market. Right? So since they were so successful there, they released a product called Microsoft Word. Probably heard of that one. Right? So in 1983, and it became a huge hit. People were using it all over the place. That led to Windows. Windows 3.0 changed everything when it came out in 1990. It's what, all of a sudden everything became graphical. Now, Windows 3.0 was not an innovation. If you're not familiar with the history, Xerox had done this before. Unix had done it before. Apple had done it before. Why was Windows 3.0 so important? Because it sold to a huge total available market. The market that had been built by the PC was gigantic. Excel and Microsoft Office follow. Right? So Microsoft was not only instrument in building this TAM, but they captured most of this TAM. Right? So they became dominant. This is like the model if you want to start a company. Figure out how to do that. So in 1996, 14 years later, Microsoft is worth more than IBM. Now, Microsoft was founded in 1975. Nobody heard of it until 1982. And now it has just displaced the company that defined the computer. Pretty impressive. Why did all this happen? TAM went up, costs went down. So that brings us to 1995. I'm graduating from NC State, and the network is the computer. This was a famous slogan from a company called Sun Microsystems. And it's interesting when you do a talk that goes back 40 years, how many companies you name that no longer exist. Right? Sun defined the networked computer for a long, long time. Right? Now, in 1995, networks were everywhere. I mean, you weren't going somewhere and finding computers that weren't on a network. But the networks were in commercial settings. They were called LANs, local area networks. And they were just 10 computers networked together. Right? They didn't connect to anything else. And there were companies out there, big companies like Novell and Lantastic, that had network solutions. And that defined the state of the art. And if you wanted a network, you went to Novell, and Novell had a, $5 or $10 billion market cap. I mean, these are real companies. And I know it's hard to believe now because they're gone. But if you wanted to build a network, or you wanted to build a product for a network, if you wanted to build a networked email solution, you had to pick one. So you got a fractured market. So you're not going after the whole PC market anymore. You're going after the part of the PC market that's running Novell that wants your product. Right? So it's small. Or you try to support Novell and Lantastic and Microsoft and IBM, and then you get a bigger market, but all your development costs are going way up. So there are different versions of every possible network application for everybody. And at the time, there was this little thing called TCP/IP coming. TCP/IP came from the government. It was on research institutions. NC State was certainly connected to this TCP/IP network. So academia and government, it was huge, but it wasn't commercially successful. IBM was commercially successful. They had APPN. If you're a bank, you're an APPN and LU 6.2. I shared an office with one of the architects, and he would just talk about how important it was and how TCP/IP was kind of junk. You know what? He was right. but it was also open and everybody could implement it. You did need a workstation to use it. So workstation now means a PC that I can't pick up and bring home with me, right? Workstation used to mean something that cost $20,000 or $15,000. It was a high-performance PC, computer. It was a microcomputer for a serious user, for an engineer, someone who really needed to do things. So when I say workstation, kind of try and keep that in mind, because that'll probably come up again. Well, web browsers came out. Again, Netscape, maybe this has moved, at least maybe you've heard these company names before. Netscape commercialized the web browser. And the web browser was really exactly what you think it is now. It was more limited. It couldn't do everything. It was built on open standards. Why did open standards matter? Well, if you wanted to publish something to the network, you could. You didn't have to pick Novell. You didn't have to pick Lantastic. You didn't have to pick FidoNet, which is where I started on email. So you could publish for multiple platforms. You could publish for PCs and Macs and workstations, all by just following a set of standards. And users only had to install a single app. Once they installed Netscape, you could go and address that market. They were now part of your total available market. And if they installed that app because they wanted to download MP3s without telling anybody, they could still go shop at Amazon.com. Right? So it was trying all of these markets together. And this is just revolutionary. And people loved it. Right? So TCP/IP at the time did not come with Windows. If you wanted to get on the internet, you had to go and you would install your own Windows drivers and TCP/IP and networking stacks. And I mean, this sounds like nobody would ever do this. But everybody did it. Like mothers and fathers and children, and everybody did this because they wanted to get to the place where they could be a participant in this market. And it went about 2 years later, 3 years later, by 1998, the internet is like everywhere. Everybody's doing it with dial-up modems, but the internet just blossomed. It was amazing how fast that happened, even as someone who was kind of living through it. And every total available market got huge. You got companies could now address a single set of people, a single market for goods and services. So the internet made some tech companies, but it made a lot of other companies that were trying to figure out how to adopt this market. Does anybody know who that sock puppet is? It's Pets.com, and Pets.com was going to sell you pet food, and they became worth something like $10 or $12 billion. And then the whole thing cratered because it turned out that pet food's heavy and it was hard to ship. All of these companies, I think, are out of business or been acquired, mostly were acquired. This was the internet bubble, right? But everybody just saw this huge, huge market where you could go and you could start selling. So that market side of that equation, right, the top just went up by 100x. If you could capture it. You could sell pet food to everybody in the country. You could sell music to everybody in the country. You could sell 401ks with E-Trade to everybody in the country, where before you had these fractured markets. So just everything. And that's why the internet boom happened. Now, so keep that in mind. The TAM just went up. Well, let's talk about the cost. Serving internet traffic was expensive. Right? It was expensive because you had to have these expensive Unix workstations. It was the only thing that could really serve it. So to set up any kind of server, you're talking about $20,000. Okay? And then you have to pay networking costs. I remember the day at Red Hat where we got a real internet connection. We'd been running the business for a year on a 56K modem. If you don't know what 56K is, because that's really slow. If your phone, when you travel overseas, ever puts a 2 in the top and says 2G, or instead not 3G or LTE or not a little, it's just a 2, that's 56K. It's slow. So Red Hat moves on. We could afford a network, but that network was probably our number one expense outside of people. Like, it was that expensive. So these servers were costing more than the IBM PC did, even though it's 15 years later. So when VCs invested in companies, where'd all the money go? It went to companies like IBM, Sun Microsystems, Hewlett-Packard, a company called SGI. A couple of those companies are out of business now. A couple of them don't really make workstations anymore. Because it was too expensive. You couldn't build these companies affordably. So what came along to reduce the cost? Red Hat. Everybody here probably knows that Red Hat's a Linux company. Well, Linux became huge in the 90s. It rode the back of the internet. Red Hat could let an Intel machine serve internet traffic, become a server. And if you didn't have a lot of money, you used Linux. And you used Linux because it was all you could afford. Because you could take that old machine from your dorm room, you could stick it on an internet connection, you could run Linux, and you had your own website. You could do e-commerce. Tons and tons of companies got started by having a Linux server in a closet somewhere. And as those companies grew, they became customers of Red Hat. And Intel class machines, the CPUs were getting stronger. They cost significantly less than a workstation. And once you put Linux on them, they felt like a Solaris workstation. They felt like a Unix workstation. And TCP/IP was native. And you know what? They were so much cheaper that if they weren't fast enough, frankly, you just bought more. Right? We're probably all used to the idea of racks and racks of computers now. You see pictures of data centers. I'm sure NC State has racks and racks of Linux machines sitting in multiple rooms probably all over the place. Before that, you just bought a bigger computer. So you bought a Sun machine with 256 processors. Right? Now, it's easier to program, right? We all know distributed systems are hard. If you're doing computer science, you probably realize that by now. But boy, it was cheap, and cheap wins. And one of the interesting things for me about Red Hat is even today when people say, oh, you were at Red Hat early, you guys did great selling support. You sold it for people to help because the software is free, you can download it. No, Red Hat didn't really make a nickel selling support. What Red Hat did was we followed Intel into people who wanted to get rid of Sun machines or SGI machines. And they said, my machines are coming off lease. Can you give me a 10x or a 5x price performance win? And Intel said, happy to help. Here's Red Hat. We'll do it together. And all Red Hat did for 3 or 4 years was follow Intel sales reps around. And what were we doing? We were driving down the cost. And you drive down the cost in this huge TAM, and you get a bubble, right? You get great things happening. And open source wasn't just Linux. It went everywhere. So a lot of these are all pretty popular projects now. They all started in the kind of that time period in the late 90s. And there's companies that are no longer in business that you might never have heard of. Companies like BEA, multi-billion-dollar company. Sybase was a database, just crushed by MySQL. Right? Borland, developer tools, they're gone. Cold Fusion, that's how you built internet applications for a long time. Anybody here learning Cold Fusion at school today? If you are, really, go somewhere. Talk to Ken. That would be bad. Right? That was a big company. I know the guys who founded that company, and that was a cutting-edge way of building internet sites. All dead. And they're dead because of open source. So, major movement brought together by Google. Right? They're the poster child. What did Google do? Well, they were 100% open source from day one. Everything in their systems was open source. It was accessible to everybody. If you wanted to do a search, you just went to google.com. It was really, really simple. It just gave you a box and you typed in what you wanted. And for a long time, they didn't even accept paid ads. When they did, they put them off to the right. So even today, when you search on Google, you know what's being paid for and you know what's organic, what's not paid for. Right? So people trusted them. They had great technology. They were the best search engine by far when it came out. But what they recognized once they got their business model right was Google just made a market of about 1 billion people. Because when you need to buy something, what do? You go to Google. Hey, where can I buy this from? If you're looking for information, you probably go to Google. If you're looking for the new song that just came out from somebody, Beyonce, you probably go to Google. Right? To the point that if you just type in the search bar now, or the location bar, the URL bar, it goes to Google. So it's really a market of 1 billion people. So they made a huge market, really limited number of resources because it was all open source, and then they sold ads into it. Turns out when you have a market of 1 billion people, if you capture, say, 0.1% of that market value, it's really, really big. Like, it's mind-blowingly big. So Google wins. Right? They really captured that internet market. They captured this whole dynamic where the TAM went up, the cost to enter went down. And they rode that wave, super successful. I think they were founded in 1997. 20 years later, they just had their 20th birthday. So 20 years later, they're huge, they're everywhere. They're a verb. So if you ever anybody asks you what your goal is when you start a company, say it's to be a verb. It's pretty good if you're a verb. It's not bad if you're a noun either. All right, so we talked about how PCs changed the world. Like PCs made this huge opportunity for companies to grow. Then the internet made this huge opportunity for people to grow. Well, we're kind of still in the middle of the third one. Wires suck. Big things stink, right? I brought a laptop. It's big. It's heavy. I mean, some of you have them out, but I think everybody here probably has a phone sitting in front of them or in their purse or in their pocket. So mobile takes over, right? Nothing else matters anymore. I don't know if anybody remembers these things. I own 2 of them, for what it's worth. I own the one on the right, and I own the one on the left, which I shouldn't admit because I'm not a Microsoft guy. But these things were cutting edge. They were cool. They had keyboards. You could send email. The one on the left had a GPS in it. That was super cool. GPS was really new. You could use maps, some mapping software, and it would tell you where you were. I mean, it would give you directions, right? They're slow. Anybody think they're a little ugly? I mean, not exactly a fashion statement, perhaps. The screens were awful, right? So they were really nerdy. Didn't really bother me. I don't think my wife liked me having one, but that was okay, right? And BlackBerry, the company in the middle, dominated. Meant they were a $2 billion a year company called Research in Motion. And so, but they owned the market. BlackBerries were like on TV, and you could see people on legal shows typing on their BlackBerries furiously. They really only did email, but it was a big enough market. They still dominated it until that. So that's the original Apple announcement. Apple was a successful company before this, but this thing was gorgeous, right? I mean, I bet half the people in here still have iPhones, maybe 60%. It was easy, right? It worked great. It was a status symbol. So remember I said IBM sold 750,000 PCs in their 3rd year? And Apple sold 300,000 of these in their first weekend? If they sold 300,000 of these in a weekend now, their stock would probably fall by 80%. Right? That's how fast this market has grown. I mean, it's incredible when you really think about how the world's changed. This phone wasn't very good. It was not nearly as good as those 3 other phones that I showed you before. It could only use 2G, that 56K thing. All those other phones were 3G. They were much, much faster. Well, you know what? The country had 25% 3G coverage, so nobody cared because the other one was beautiful. It was only on AT&T. It was on a single network. If you were on any other network, you didn't have an iPhone, so everybody just switched to AT&T because it was that cool. There were no third-party apps. Can you imagine a smartphone where you couldn't install apps? At the time, Steve Jobs said, just use a web browser. It's fine. People will just build really good mobile sites. It had really crummy email. We had all these people at my office buy these things, and they couldn't get their email. They didn't integrate into any email system anybody used. None of this mattered. Right? It changed everything because everybody wanted one. And the total available market of the internet just exploded. This is why mobile did not change the world because you can now do it sitting in your chair, though that's pretty cool. Mobile changed the world because there's 1.4 billion people with mobile devices. Right? That's China and America. Right? So we don't need, that's huge, right? So everybody has these things. The PC turns down, mobile goes up, and the total available market of things you can reach by a smartphone is 7 times what the internet market was. So hopefully you understand why that is such a big deal. Well, what did that mean to those 5 companies I mentioned at the beginning? Well, Apple's a mobile company. You can think of Apple as a Mac company. I mean, I see there's a bunch of Macs here, and you can think of Apple as an iTunes company. 56% of Mac revenue is from iPhones. And they just keep coming out with new ones, and they just keep selling them. Okay? Not iPads, not watches, iPhones, literally the hardware. So that's how many of these things there are out there. They're also about 10 to 15% of the smartphone market worldwide, to give you a feel for how big this market is. Then they sell 15 to 20% of their sales on services, App Store, Apple Care, all that other, iTunes, like all that stuff. So if you look at Apple, 75% of their revenue is mobile. So if you have a Mac, great, I hope you like it, but don't think it's what Apple cares about, right? They care about this other stuff. That's where they make their money. Along comes Facebook. Facebook was a good company before mobile. It was founded in 2004. That means literally everybody in this room is quite a bit older than Facebook. I hope. And they added Instagram. But remember, we talked about Microsoft having gone from 1982 to 1996, 14 years, and they were worth more than IBM. But they had been a company already for 7 or 8 years. Facebook is now the 5th biggest company in the world by market cap. Why? They have 1.5 billion users a day. That's a lot of people. Right? They have created a market for advertising that lets other people reach that mobile market. Right? I mean, everybody's heard this. Facebook's product is you. No, Facebook's product is you. They sell it really, really well. And they have $450 billion to show for it. These are not the only companies that have won on mobile. All of these companies have won on mobile. You guys think of all these as internet companies, right? I mean, I don't know if there's any outliers there. New York Times, total available market is now the entire world. Certainly the whole Western Hemisphere. It wasn't before. So if you look at the percentage of revenue for the New York Times that is digital now, it is 35 to 40% and growing. It's double-digit growth. Domino's Pizza is my favorite one here. Is Domino's an internet company or a mobile company? Well, my son really likes Domino's, a 16-year-old. And you know how he orders his pizza? On his phone. And what happens when he orders his pizza? It says, oh, your pizza's going in the oven now. You get a little notification. Oh, your pizza's out of the oven waiting for a driver. And your pizza's with a driver. I don't know if they have real-time tracking yet, but they will, right? Their market cap, if you look at the multiple of Domino's compared to Papa John's, is like 3 times bigger by the multiple. Why? Because they've leveraged mobile, they've leveraged the internet better than anyone else in the US pizza market. And because of mobile and because of the internet, the market for pizza is a national market. Right? Because I can use that same Domino's application whether I'm in Raleigh or Seattle, the Cayman Islands, or probably Italy. They probably wouldn't want to admit it. Right? So mobile has really made this huge, huge market. Didn't really affect costs, but wow. It really, the TAM was just out of control. So that's really how I've seen innovation happen. You see the PCs lead to network PCs, lead to mobile PCs, lead to smartphones. Every one of these things. The size of the market, the number of people you can potentially sell to goes up, and you end up with, when you have one market, you have a winner-takes-all dynamic. When we raised our first big round, our first real venture round at Pendo, we were sitting with an investor from a company called Battery. And this guy is on the Midas list. If you don't know the Midas list, it's a list of the venture people who make the most money, right? So very successful. And we're just sitting there having drinks. And he said, hey guys, just so you know, we've done all this work at companies who are selling into your kind of market, software as a service market. And what we found is the winner gets 90% of the return. So one company in any market they can define gets 90% of the cash in their pockets. Wow. I said, well, what's the number 2 get? I said, about 8%. So what do you think number 3 gets? And number 4, and number 10? So all of the markets are national, they're unified markets. And it's why you see companies like Pendo, frankly, raising money the way we do. Because we're either number 1 or we lose. So nobody's playing for number 2. And the reward of being number 1 in a market that big with this kind of cost structure is so overwhelming that investors might lose $50 million. But then they'll have another company that makes it to number 1. And so you've got to be number 1 in these huge markets because of these international markets. Single market because of the internet, because of mobile. So what's next? Figured I'd give you some of my guesses. You guys are probably all graduating soon. Well, I feel a little funny putting this one first, but I don't think the story's played out yet on cloud computing. And now I have to get to talk about Amazon. Amazon was the one company I haven't mentioned yet out of those 5. Right? Well, Amazon gets, I put the number in here, right? Oh yeah, 100%, I should have remembered that. Last year it provided 100% of their operating income. Literally every dollar that Amazon makes is by being a cloud provider. So where does all that money go? It goes into making movies, TV shows, shipping you things for free. All of that stuff nets out to break even. That's pretty stunning, isn't it? Because they're a big company and a very successful company, but they are a technology company. They are a cloud computing company. Why are they being so successful? They're first to market, and they realized the way to make the TAM, the value equation better, TAM over cost, is let's reduce the cost for everybody we can find. What are people putting money into? They're buying machines from Dell. They're buying software from Oracle still. They're buying software from Red Hat maybe. They're having to hire people to wire cables and plug things in. We'll just rent it to them. We can just build a big data center in DC or 20 big data centers in DC, and we'll just rent it. And now these companies don't have to go buy a computer. They'll just pay for it by the hour. And so and machine learning, databases, storage, all of these things have moved into this pay by the hour, pay for capacity. And Amazon really invented this market. So that's driving the cost of innovation down. Right? Well, it was on the back of virtualization. So I'm going to rewind a little bit and talk about this one. I don't talk about this one that much. This is the one I did this is the company I did that I learned a lot from. And it's good to learn. One thing I learned, one saying I learned a long time ago was the way that you avoid mistakes is by experience, and the way you gain experience is by making mistakes. I made a lot of mistakes. I just tried to catch the wave of virtualization and cloud. Didn't work. Turns out that things like Docker now are catching that wave that we were going after. And I went on to Pendo. Pendo started operations in 2014. We have about 240 employees now. It's pretty good, right? Happy about that. We are entirely built on the cloud. And I don't just mean we're built on the cloud for my product, which is software as a service. I mean, we do not own a server. We do own printers. We don't own a file server. I don't own a upgrade server for my laptop. I don't own a server. I don't employ a database administrator. Right? I just don't have one. Don't need one. I rent all that stuff. I don't have a network engineer. I don't have a build farm. I don't even have a set of machines that build my code. All that stuff is in the internet somewhere. And we happen to be built on Google. But at Red Hat, I had to go buy all that stuff. So where was my money going? It was going into data centers. And we had raised floor space. I traveled to data centers, and I put machines in racks, and I hooked up cables. We had network engineers. We had database engineers. We had like a set of 10 machines that all it did was build our code. And that's where we had to put our money. At Pendo, I'm hiring people who make a difference. Right? I'm hiring people who are working on the business problem that I'm trying to solve for my customers. And so the leverage I get out of that is huge. And the amount of it, I mean, I have 65, 70 people in engineering, but they're all focused on my customer. Nobody's focused internally. Major, major difference. Makes us very capital efficient. Frankly, it makes it more fun, because solving solved problems isn't a lot of fun. It's not why I got a degree. I want to solve new problems. But it's all enabled by cloud infrastructure, Google's in particular. So I think cloud's going to keep going. I think as people move into higher services, platform as a service, all that's just going to keep driving those costs down. I think there's a ton of innovation left to go in that space. I think we've scratched the surface. Maybe it's the Internet of Things. I don't know. Are there any computer engineers or electrical engineers in here? A couple? Well, I'm a computer engineering double major, so go, good. Computers are getting tiny. They're really, really small, low power, always connected, very insecure, but never mind that. How many are you going to have in your house in 10 years? I don't even want to imagine. They're cheap to get started. Someone's going to figure out how to make a lot of money here because the total available market is just too big not to. I don't think anybody has yet. I don't know if you know both these companies that did Nest, the thermostats you probably recognize. The other one is Ring. It's a smart doorbell with a video camera in it, so you can see who's at your door. That was bought by Amazon. So you're already seeing exits, but nobody has really figured out how to make the Internet of Things huge. There will be a Google in this space. Right? Everybody has a home. What about high-speed mobile? Mobile's 5G is rolling out. Mobile speeds are going to be 10x what they are right now. Someone's going to make this huge. I don't know who it is. Is it going to be ads? Is it going to be something else? One of the most disappointing experiences I think I've ever had in my career is as I was leaving Red Hat, there was 4 or 5 of us leaving at the same time. We're like, hey, let's start a company, because that's what we do. We start companies. And so, well, what should we do? And we were talking about market trends, technology trends, what's going on. And one of the 5 of us said, you know what? Bandwidth. there's going to be bandwidth everywhere. There's going to be all this bandwidth, and people are going to make a lot of money by the fact that the price of home bandwidth is going to zero. That company was called Netflix. So while I spotted the trend, I had no idea how to monetize it. But if you can start looking at what these things look like, look for these trends, and what I want you to remember from this talk, well, increase it, if you can increase the total market size. Disruptions make the whole market bigger, right? You can sell to more people, you can reach more people, you can address more people. That's probably a really good thing to be looking for. What markets are growing? What's making them grow, and how can I get a piece of that? Size of audience, ability to pay, value of product, things like that. Is the cost going down? Can I be a provider that's driving the cost down, or can I take advantage of a provider who's driving a cost down? The biggest disruptors do both of these. Those are the companies that win really, really large. Right? So value equals market over cost. It's really not very complicated. It's a nice, simple ratio. You want one to go up and one to go down. You probably realize that already. The other direction's not so good. And technology and engineering drive both. You know, I'm talking to an engineering school, computer science school. You guys are in the right spot. You're the ones who make it happen. If you drive markets up, you drive costs down. And while it may feel like the job of an engineer or the job of a software developer is like right here, I mean, developers and computer scientists have changed the last 40 years, the last 50 years of America and the world, right? This is really what it's all about. There's a reason that the rich people, the successful people, and the poster children are all people who studied in these fields and who went through this. So with that, thank you very much. I hope I said something interesting in there. And if not, I hope you get class credit anyway. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to see if I can address them.
So we have a microphone. If you have a question, if you'll raise your hand, we have just one ambassador. Somebody, okay, so we have two. Wait, and yeah, here's a question in the back row. Just wait until you get the microphone, say it so we can capture it on video, okay?
Hi, I really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you.
And so I have two questions. So once you start a company, I mean, as you've done, and you're a really small size company, you have really limited resources. How do you choose the best people to work with you? Because I think that's really essential. And my second question to you would be, so you transitioned from computer science to economics and then back. So the degree you got and everything that you studied, how did it add to your thinking capabilities and eventually to where you are right now?
Great questions. So I'll address both of those. I'm even going to address the second one maybe more than you meant me to. So hiring people. Yeah, hiring people is everything, right? There's not a more important job at Pendo than hiring. My co-founder, Todd Olson, and I still interview everybody. One of us interviews everybody we hire at Pendo. And why do we do it? It's not to see if you're smart. It's not to see if you've learned the Go programming language or Java or Scala. I don't actually do a technical interview at all. I think the technical skills you can evaluate relatively easily. It's culture. We need people who are going to come in, value Pendo, value the culture we're building, value the people they're going to work with. And look, I'm like a math geek, I'm a math minor, I'm a computer engineer. I'm not the most touchy-feely guy in the world, right? I'm probably not the most empathetic human being you're ever going to meet. Culture is everything. So when I meet people, if I don't think they're a cultural fit, I don't hire them. We have our culture written on our wall. We have 7 core values. I used to think that was like the corniest thing ever until you put them on your wall and you start talking about them and you start recruiting to them, then you start living them. So an example of that is we have a maniacal focus on customers. That's one of our core values. So when I'm interviewing people, I'm asking myself, is this guy going to work for that customer? Doesn't mean is he going to work until 4 a.m., right? But is this girl going to go the extra mile and make my customer win? Because we don't care if we lose money on one of those customers. We want them to win. And that's really, now there's other ways to build companies. I'm not saying that should be your value as a company, but define your values. We did it the first week we were together as founders and hire to those. The other one I would say that is very important to us in hiring, again, not for everybody, but I don't hire engineers if I cannot put them on the phone with a customer. So I know I had to take a public speaking class at NC State. This is why. If you're wondering why you had to take that class, now you know. But I want every engineer to be on the phone with a customer. They never do it, but I have to have that capability. Other companies don't hire for that, but it is so important to us that we had a wonderful intern. Everybody thought he was just great, and when he came out with his bachelor's degree, we didn't hire him. And we didn't hire him because I had 2 people interview him, and they both said, Erik, he's just not that communicative. He's not that good. And when I interviewed him, he couldn't get his ideas across. He couldn't engage. He couldn't have that conversation about why he wanted to be at Pendo and what he was going to do. And that was just, we let a really strong engineer go and passed on him because he didn't meet our values. So that's what I would say for hiring, and absolutely focus on it. Second one is my engineering degree. So I'm going to answer this in 3 parts. I'm going to answer it, first of all, how did it help me at Red Hat? Well, at Red Hat, I was building an operating system. I said I had the worst job in open source because everything that was fun, someone else did for free. I did the rest. But it turned out that classes like operating systems was really important. Compiler theory I used. Graph theory I used for doing the dependency resolver for RPM. I literally thought about that for a year before it occurred to me in the shower one morning, that's how you write it. And I finished it that afternoon. But all of the courses, so many of the courses I took at NC State in the computer science and the computer engineering curriculum prepared me brilliantly to go in and being an operating system engineer. So I think I was fortunate in the classes I took, and I think I was fortunate in the job I landed, that everything came together. Why did I get an economics degree? I kind of told you. I was really curious about where all this came from. I'd just been through an amazing experience, right? I watched my CEO at NASDAQ ringing a bell. I was like, wow, what the heck just happened? So I went back to try and learn what happened. I didn't learn what happened at all. I left after a year in a master's degree because I decided that what I really did not want to do, this is maybe offensive, I don't think so because this is the audience, but I did not want to teach a bunch of liberal arts majors how to read a graph. Like, that was not where I was going with my life, right? I needed people who already knew how to read a graph. But I got my master's degree, and what I actually got out of that when I came out the other side, as I went back into the industry, is I learned how do markets work. I learned why do people buy. I did not get an MBA, but I learned a lot about how markets fit together, how buying behaviors worked, and frankly, it just made me smarter. You sit and you do a whole bunch of math that looks just like physics for a couple of years. It makes you smarter. I did a lot of statistics. I know NC State has a great big data program, data process. Big data is huge, machine learning is huge, and I have more fluency because I did that degree. And then going back into Pendo, I use all of that. We have something that looks like a query engine that we do compile to graphs, and we optimize graphs in order to get the best output across distributed machines. So tons and tons of that stuff come right back in. Is it all directly applicable? No, some of it is, some of it isn't. I actually write parsers in Yak still, believe it or not. But so much of it relates that I could not have asked to be better prepared, really, for what I do, given some of the academic choices I made. So, any other questions?
So now that, as you mentioned, that the cost is going down, everything is on the cloud, and so I kind of believe that, I'm the product and we all are the products. So for example, I upload my data on Google Drive. I believe that they're stealing my intellectual capital. Do you agree with it, and where do you think it's going to go in the next 10 years?
Are they mining the data to sell advertising about you? Yes. They're very upfront about it. Are they stealing your intellectual capital? No. Now, if you think machine learning is good enough to sort through all the data that Google has in order to identify a good idea, no, they don't. If you can invent the technology to do that, go to Google and they'll pay you a lot of money, right? It's hugely valuable. But I don't think they're stealing the data. We're all hosted on Google. All of our emails on Google. All our Google Drives on Google, I guess. All of my code, I ship. So we are not like EC2. I don't rent servers. Like, I can't log into a server, really. I ship Google my source code. I say, here you go. Compile it for me. It compiles it. It deploys it onto machines somewhere. If I want more machines, I hit a REST endpoint, and I go from 20 to 40. And I cannot tell you how cool it is to go from 20 to 1,000 by pressing a button and waiting 2 minutes. It is awfully cool. It is like the best feeling until I see my CFO the next day. But so I don't worry about that at all. They can have it all. I mean, I have Google people who read my source code to help me debug it sometimes. Right? So it's all going to the cloud. If you fight it, you're going to lose. There's one then right there.
Thanks for waiting.
I feel like I should learn to dance or something while I'm up here.
So my question is, if you basically, like when you come up with a new, I guess, startup idea, how do you gauge the demand for, or the market demand for that and see if it's actually worth it or not? And how long do you wait between that time and going to, I guess, venture capitalists for investment?
Okay. There's good ways and bad ways to do that. The very best way is to find customers and go talk to customers. How much, is this a problem you have? If I help solve this problem, I don't ask for money. Will you help me try it? I want to build a solution to your problem. Will you give it a go and see if it works? If you can get people to say, you know what, I'll invest my time into trying your solution, that's a buying sign, right? So you don't try and get money right away. You don't have to talk about how much they would pay. They don't know how much they would pay, all right? You can talk about what's the dollar value of your problem, how much of a problem is this? If it's not one of their top 3 problems, they're not going to be a customer. Nobody has time to solve problem number 85. I was on the phone with a company who was trying to sell to me yesterday. So just so you know, this is like problem number 12 on my list, so don't, I can try and find you the person where this is number 3. So that's the best way. That's what Pendo did. It's one of the reasons we were very successful. You can also do what, frankly, RPath and Red Hat did. RPath, it didn't work very well. I had a gut feeling. I said, let's go do this. I built technology. I did not build product. Don't build technology, build product. Just telling you, that was 7 long years building the wrong thing. So that's not great. Red Hat, they started really small. They started building a product that was really cheap. Red Hat got its start, got its first revenue, downloading stuff off the internet. It's going to go on film. Downloading stuff off the internet and sending it to people because people were on modems and CDs were faster, right? So, and the company grew from there. They said, well, we want to do our own content. We want to do this. We want to do that. So the best thing you can do is find users, find customers. When do you go after venture capital? One of the really cool things about this, the cost has gone down, right? Cost has gone down. That means the cost of starting a company has gone down. Venture capitals used to fund people to start companies. Today, venture capitalists fund people to scale companies. They scale them to grow, to get big. So we raised seed round. We got money locally. We got it very early, but it was like $1 million. And believe me, if you have 5 people, $1 million is like nothing, right? It's nothing. We did that twice. When we had roadmap, we could see, hey, we could sell $1 million at this. Like, here's the customers who might buy. If I close a third of them, I'm going to be at $1 million. Then venture capitalists will come in. They're kind of professional, bigger venture capitalists. But that first stuff, be scrappy, be scroungy. The better you can prove your idea before you raise money, the better, especially before you raise big money. And there's seed capital in Raleigh. There's the Wolfpack Investors Network, which I know works with a bunch of folks. The Entrepreneurs Program here can help. There's VCs in Durham and Raleigh. There's vocal money available for a good idea. If you can't raise money, figure out what's wrong with your idea and what's wrong with your presentation. The problem is probably you. And I mean that as someone who's failed to raise money on occasion. It's probably you need to get better at your messaging.